As I said, the universal experience of most of us, apart from public toilets, no, it's not public toilets in actual fact, it's a supermarket. It's a place where we all have to go, whether we like to or not. That's where our food comes from. And farmers try to convince you otherwise. They say it comes from elsewhere. Well, it doesn't look like it to me. Meat comes in one of those little dishes and the plastic glad wrap covering. That's where you get meat. I don't know. They'd say it comes from cows and sheep, but it certainly comes from a supermarket for me. But anyhow, the reality is that we are imprisoned, though it would seem, by a duopoly, a grocery duopoly in this country. And on that issue, Nicola Willis decided to opine in her guise as the Minister of Finance and presumably, as the Minister of Finance. 2 or 3 days ago, as the Economic Growth Minister. That's right, I forgot she's got that title in this one. The government says that all options are on the table. So it was an announcement that really just announced that there was an announcement to introduce more competition into the supermarket sector, which could, and there is the word, I hate that word, could. It's sort of like may, might, which means it never usually happens, include the breakup or restructuring of the two existing supermarket chains. Now, currently, as we know, Woolworths and Foodstuffs dominate the New Zealand supermarket sector. Economic Growth Minister Nicola Willis said that grocery prices in New Zealand were high by international standards. And she gave some statistics along those lines. I think she said that they were 9% higher, which is quite a lot, than any other comparable Western democracy. Whether that's because we're in New Zealand, we're stuck down the bottom of the South Pacific, it doesn't matter. She's determined to introduce competition, but what that determination looks like, we still don't know. To join us to talk about this, because this is a universal issue that affects every one of us, is Jon Duffy, the Chief Executive of Consumer New Zealand, who joins us now. Jon, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us again.
No worries.
Listen, mate, I read that announcement and went, ho hum. Did you do the same thing?
No, I was actually quite heartened by
Were you?
the announcement. And there's a couple of things going on in the background that may not have been immediately obvious, but if
Okay,
if
go.
you pull
Yep.
out some of the key words, you go, actually, this is some momentum. So firstly, there is something happening. We've got a minister now in cabinet, the finance minister, who has supermarkets as her portfolio. That is a huge leap forward. That is a huge amount of attention, power, and the ability to bend the ear of cabinet colleagues to get something done here. Secondly, and importantly, I think structural separation is firmly back on the table. Now, I think reading between the lines, the minister is sending one last final, almost a little bit desperate warning shot across the bows of the supermarket by citing the relevant section in the Commerce Act that would allow them to voluntarily divest some of their assets. I think there is some vain hope being left within the coalition that the supermarkets will take care of matters themselves and they won't have to intervene. But barring that, there's almost a resignation in the words of the minister there that we need to keep structural separation on the table. And in our view at Consumer NZ, the time for talking's over. We've had 3 years since the Commerce Commission's market study. We've had a follow-up report from the Commerce Commission that says the regulatory interventions that flowed out of that market study, actually the situation's got worse. There's less competition. There are higher prices for consumers. We need to stop talking. We need to do something. In our view, it's only the government stepping in here and taking some form of structural separation is the only way we'll get real competition here.
Okay. Let's just unpack some of that to start with. The intervention of the government or the desire that the supermarkets sort things out for themselves, hasn't that been a tried and fail routine of both administrations, this one and the previous one as well? They're not going to change anything. And as you've just commented, things have got worse, not better.
Well, that's our view. Turkeys don't vote for Christmas.
Correct.
These are highly profitable entities. Why on earth would they for Woolworths, for their shareholders, for foodstuffs, for their supermarket owners, why on earth would they voluntarily do something that will reduce their ability to profit?
Yep. Okay. So, given that case, do you detect, though, when you talk about structural separation coming on and the intervention of a government, a reluctance to do so because philosophically or ideologically, national parties don't like to get involved in telling business how to operate?
Look, I'm sure there's an element of that. The bigger point, I think, is this is bloody hard. This is not a simple solution, and you'd only consider it in quite dire circumstances. And that's, in my view, where we find ourselves. I mean, the stats you quoted at the start around us having some of the most expensive food prices in the world as a major food producer is bananas and a direct result of a highly concentrated supermarket sector that has a stranglehold on the food supply to our population. And it's all well and good to say, hey, we produce lots of meat and lots of cheese and lots of milk. If consumers can't get their hands on those products in an easy and convenient way that suits their lifestyles, then they may as well be being produced offshore.
The
Um,
government,
it-
or Nicola
we
Willis, did rule out, though, John directly entering it. So she said, unlike Kiwi Bank, which was meant to act and hasn't really, as a disruptor in the banking sector, New Zealand government won't be going in and providing competition directly itself. She then talked about separating wholesalers and retailers because she said supermarket monopolies, or the duopoly, controls both sectors. I'm struggling to see how separating them would actually reduce prices. Can you explain that to me?
so all of the minister's comments are premised on the fact that we get new entry into the market, and so structural separation could work in a number of ways. Firstly, separating retail and wholesale would then give you two independent wholesalers in New Zealand. So any third party looking to enter New Zealand would then have someone not owned by its direct retail competitor that they could buy wholesale groceries off. So it secures that supply chain through to retail. So that's what's called vertical separation. The other thing that's on the table, and I think is important to keep in mind, is what's called horizontal separation, which is just looking at the retail level. So the brands we see as consumers out there are owned by two companies. If you were to say, New World, you have to get rid of all your pack and save brands, for example, that's what's called horizontal separation. And that immediately allows a third player to go, well, we'll come in and buy those pack and saves and we'll brand them up as, I don't know, third party supermarket company. And we've immediately got a footprint, we've got nationwide scale, we can start competing right away as long as we can answer that wholesale question at the same time.
Because I think that's what Nicola Willis was also saying in her speech. She was saying that the problem is that you've got to go and buy the land when all the really good places for supermarkets are pretty much taken up. So there's a barrier for a third party coming in because you've then got to actually purchase somewhere which is close to population when all the good areas have gone. Plus, you've then got to, start a supermarket business from scratch. Are you saying that she could literally legally force New World, for example, or at least what would be foodstuffs? Foodstuffs? Yeah.
Food
To
stuff, yeah, that's
divest
right.
its cheap budget or cheaper budget supermarket chain, Pack and Save, and sell it to a third party.
Yes, make it available for sale. So, I mean, Parliament is sovereign in this country. Corporations aren't. The government could step in, write legislation, and say, for competition reasons, we require divestiture of certain assets. They would want to be very, very certain that they did it in a way that was even handed and didn't create an advantage for one or the other players in that market already. So, this is a very delicate and surgical thing that would need to be taken with great care. But to go back to your earlier point, a new entrant needs somewhere to sell products to consumers and it needs somewhere to buy wholesale groceries from. And the existing duopolists have both of those tied up at the moment because you're right, we're actually quite well served for supermarket outlets in New Zealand, if you take all the branding off them and just
Yeah.
look at population centres and how many supermarkets there are actual geographical duopolies or monopolies within the broader market. Um, you need some way of getting a footprint in there. Also, don't forget the supermarkets have been land banking. So it's not just the supermarket sites that have existing supermarkets on them. They've bought up prime land and it's sitting empty in many regions around the country. And in fact, the Commerce Commission found recently that the total number of empty sites had increased since its market study in 2022. So that problem's got worse. That needs to be addressed as well.
Okay. You're a bit more optimistic than I am because as you explain all that to me, and as you said in your opening remarks, turkeys don't vote for Christmas. There would be no reason for Woolworths or Foodstuffs to change their behaviour. It would be okay. I'm not blinking.
Well, the only reason would be if the threat was so tangible. So if legislation was going through the House and one or other of the existing market participants said, "Okay, we can see that this isn't a bluff. We will offer up a solution." It would then be for the government to go, "Well, will that solution bring about the outcomes we're looking for, which is ultimately fairness for consumers and suppliers, and the ability for let's not pretend that supermarkets shouldn't be able to make a profit. They should. It's just that profit should be reasonable and not extortionate as it is at the moment."
I wonder if you could also explain, and I'm glad you made the difference between Woolworths, which is shareholder owned, and then Foodstuffs, which is a sort of a cooperative, if you like. Um, can you explain to me if they were going to enter into that action? There's a whole series of individuals who've purchased, as I understand, in the New World and Pack and Save cases, supermarkets which they own and operate themselves, and presumably then have a wider responsibility to the overarching foodstuffs network. Would, if they were required to sell, it wouldn't just be a simple, oh well, this is Woolworths and you just have to give up those particular shops. You'd actually be stripping those individuals, wouldn't you, of their property rights as well.
Mhm.
Is that another reason why the government would be so reluctant? Or ownership structure in particular of foodstuffs?